Joy's footsteps echoed faintly against the polished tiles as she went to her room. Angela had rushed off to the church in a hurry, leaving her to settle in. Her hand brushed against a brass doorknob she had never noticed before. The door was heavy, darker than the others. She would have walked past it, but her foot slipped on the shiny floor. To steady herself, she grabbed the knob, and the door swung open with a slow, reluctant creak. The smell hit her first. Metallic, thick, like rust and rot. Joy's stomach twisted. She stepped inside before her mind could stop her. The room was dim, lit only by the flicker of candles pressed against the walls. At the center stood a crude wooden table, drenched in stains too dark to be anything but blood. On it lay knives, ropes, bowls filled with congealed liquid. Around the table, arranged carefully as though on display, were human heads, eyes closed, mouths frozen in silent screams. Joy's breath caught in her throat. She staggered backward, her hand flying to her mouth, but no sound came out. Her body trembled violently. The woman she had grown up with, the girl who once shared stolen bread with her in the orphanage, had built her empire on this horror. Tears blurred her vision, but she could not look away. Blood smeared the floor, dripping from charms that dangled in the corners of the room. The air itself felt alive, heavy with something dark, something that seemed to watch her. Her knees buckled. For a second, she almost collapsed. But terror gave her strength. With shaking hands, she pulled the door shut and stumbled into the hall. She had to run. She had to tell someone. The memory of their childhood promises, "We will rise together, we will be sisters forever," burned in her chest like fire as she fled the mansion. Angela had risen, yes. But she had risen on the bodies of innocents. And now Joy knew the truth. Angela was 4 years old when the world decided she was a burden. She had no memory of her parents, only whispers and the way the adults avoided her eyes. Her father's brothers said they couldn't take her in, her mother's sisters claimed they had too many mouths to feed already. They didn't even argue for long. She was simply passed over, like an unwanted object, until the final decision was made. The day they abandoned her at the orphanage, she clung to the hem of her aunt's wrapper, her tiny voice cracking as she cried, "Don't leave me." But the woman peeled her hands away and turned without a glance. A stranger with a sour face pulled Angela forward, placed a tattered doll in her hand, and said, "This is home now." That was the first day Angela learned that sometimes the world could crush you without saying a word. The orphanage was no refuge. The children were always hungry, their ribs poking through thin skin. Their clothes were donated rags, never quite fitting, too loose, too tight, too torn. The caretakers carried tempers sharper than knives. Some children flinched whenever footsteps echoed down the hall, because punishment often came before comfort. But in the shadows of despair, Angela found light. Kemi, sharp-eyed and quick-witted. Stella, who could turn scraps of food into a feast with her laughter. Joy, whose name fit her perfectly, because she laughed even when the world gave her nothing to smile about. The four of them became sisters not by blood, but by pain. They made a promise one night as rain drummed on the leaking roof, "We will make it. We will rise above this. Together." Angela clung to that promise with the fierceness of someone who had nothing else. She had no memory of a mother's lullaby or a father's smile, but she had the warmth of her friend's hands in hers, and it was enough. As the years rolled by, survival became a rhythm. Hunger was familiar, and so were harsh words, but the four friends found strength in their shared dream. They studied hard, stealing hours under dim bulbs, borrowing old textbooks, and teaching one another when teachers failed them. To them, knowledge was not just power, it was escape. Scholarships came like miracles. One by one, doors opened. The girls were sent away to universities, each carrying the weight of their promise. Angela watched her friends leave with bright eyes and big plans. She left too, though her steps were heavier, her hope dimmer. Kemi rose fast, her sharp mind carving a path in law. Stella threw herself into business, her laughter now echoing in boardrooms. Joy became a doctor, her hands healing where others would have turned away. They were proof that their childhood dreams had not been empty. But Angela struggled. Jobs slipped through her fingers. Projects collapsed. She tried again and again, but life seemed to push her down harder each time she stood. Pride kept her from asking for help. Whenever Kemi or Stella extended a hand, Angela forced a smile and said, "I'll be fine." Even Joy, who pleaded the softest, could not break her stubbornness. Bitterness began to whisper in Angela's heart. She watched her sisters in destiny bloom, while she withered in their shadow. And though she still smiled for them, deep down she asked herself why the promise they had made together seemed to leave her behind. Failure clung to Angela like a second skin. Every attempt to rise ended in ruin. Each rejection letter, each business failure, each unpaid bill pushed her further into a corner. Nights were the worst. Alone in her rented room, she lay awake, her chest heavy, her thoughts bitter. She remembered the orphanage nights, when they had sworn to rise together. Why, then, was she the one still crawling while the others flew? She stopped answering calls sometimes. When she did pick up, she forced cheer into her voice, while bitterness swelled underneath. Her friends' successes felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Kemi with her victories in court. Stella with her booming company. Joy saving lives in hospitals. They lived the life they had all dreamed of, while Angela lived with constant lack. Desperation drove her to places she had once despised. One night, she sought out a native doctor she had heard of through whispers. She told herself she wasn't giving up, she was just trying another way. The old man's heart smelled of incense and blood. He looked at her as though he already knew her story. "You want power," he said, not asking but declaring. Angela nodded, her lips trembling. The price was steep, but Angela's pride blinded her to fear. She told herself the world had abandoned her, so why shouldn't she take what she could? That night, she walked out with charms, chants, and promises. For the first time in years, she felt her chest lift with hope. Not pure hope, but something darker. Soon after, Angela announced she had received a call from God. She was starting a ministry. The world bowed before her. Angela's name spread fast. Prophetess Angela, they called her. The woman who saw visions, who healed the sick, who made the barren conceive. She stood on pulpits, her voice strong, her eyes blazing, and people believed. They gave offerings, they shouted her name, they filled her coffers. Angela built an empire out of deception. She bought mansions, wore flowing gowns, and drove cars worth fortunes. The orphan girl had finally become a queen in the eyes of the world. But behind the stage lights, there was darkness. The spirits that gave her power demanded blood, innocent blood. Teenage girls began to vanish. Angela's mansion had a forbidden room, one that no maid or church worker was ever allowed to enter. Inside, the truth rotted in blood and bone. Human heads lined the table, charms dripped with sacrifice, and the smell of death hung thick. Angela silenced her conscience by repeating one phrase, "The world was never kind to me, so why should I be kind?" And so she grew, powerful and untouchable, her fame a mask over her monstrous truth. Years passed, and the bond of the four friends stained with distance. Yet, when they met, the laughter returned as if time had not moved. Angela played her role well. She spoke of blessings, of God's favor, of how hard she worked for her success. Her friends believed her because they wanted to. Then came the day Joy returned to town. She had been away for years, saving lives in another country. When she heard Angela's ministry was thriving, she decided to visit, carrying the warmth of old times in her heart. Joy knocked on the gates of Angela's mansion, her suitcase in hand, her smile wide with expectation. Angela welcomed her. She looked every bit the prophetess, regal gowns, glittering jewels, a voice full of authority. She wrapped her arms around Joy and said, "You stay here. You're my sister." For a moment, Joy's heart swelled. They had survived the orphanage together. To see Angela like this was almost healing. But the mansion carried shadows Joy could not name. The staff avoided certain hallways. Doors stayed locked. Angela's eyes sometimes hardened when she thought no one was looking. One evening, Angela was called urgently to the church. A dignitary had arrived, and her presence was demanded. In her haste, she left instructions for Joy to rest. What Angela did not notice was that she had forgotten to lock one door, the door. Joy never meant to open it. She was passing through the corridor when her foot slipped on the polished floor, her hand catching the doorknob to steady herself. The door creaked open. What she saw beyond it froze her blood. The air inside was thick, damp, suffocating. At first her mind refused to accept what her eyes were telling her. But then the details sharpened, the bloodstains that clung to the floor like shadows, the crude altar draped in black cloth, the rows of severed heads arranged like trophies. Joy staggered back, her body shaking uncontrollably. She wanted to scream but her throat locked. Her childhood friend, the one who had starved with her, laughed with her, prayed with her under a leaking roof, had become this. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled out of the room. Fear battled with courage. She thought of running, of pretending she hadn't seen. But then she remembered the girls, those missing faces on posters, the names whispered in grief. She realized the truth. Angela's success was built on their blood. With trembling hands, Joy left the mansion. She did not stop until she reached the nearest police station. Her voice cracked as she told them everything. The police arrived swiftly. Angela's mansion, once untouchable, became a crime scene. Officers stormed the forbidden room, their faces pale as they confirmed Joy's words. The smell of death, the grotesque altar, the human remains, it was all there. Evidence no miracle could wash away. Angela was found in her church, the crowd singing and clapping as if nothing was wrong. The police pushed through the congregation, handcuffed her, and dragged her down the steps of her own altar. Gasps filled the hall. People screamed. Some fainted. Their prophetess was led away like a common criminal. News spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Woman of God" or "Woman of Blood." Videos of her arrest flooded the nation. Believers wept in confusion. Critics shook their heads. The world watched in disbelief as the mask Angela had worn for years was torn away in a single night. Angela sat in the interrogation room, her face cold. She did not beg. She did not deny. When confronted with the evidence, she only smiled faintly and said, "I should have been more careful." The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses testified about missing daughters, maids who had disappeared after working in Angela's house, offerings that never reached the poor. The room where she performed sacrifices was shown in photographs, its horror displayed for all. Angela's 3 childhood friends sat in court, broken. Kemi covered her face. Stella wept openly. Joy could not stop trembling. They had promised to rise together. How had it come to this? The judge's voice rang firm, "Angela Okoye, you are hereby sentenced to death for the murder of innocent lives." The courtroom erupted. Some cheered for justice. Others wailed in disbelief. Through it all, Angela sat still. No tears. No pleas. Only a gaze that carried both defiance and emptiness. The day of execution came heavy with silence. Angela was led out, her hands bound, her head held high. The guards asked if she had any final words. She laughed softly, bitterly. "My only regret," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut, "is forgetting to lock the door that day. If I had, none of you would have found out." Gasps filled the room. She continued, her tone colder than death itself. "The world was never kind to me. I had no kindness to give. Everything I had, I scraped and clawed for. If you think I should be sorry, you are fools. I owe nothing to anyone. Those were her last words. No repentance. No plea for mercy. Just bitterness dressed as strength. The curtain fell on her life as it had begun, with abandonment. But this time, there were no friends to hold her hand, no promises to keep her warm. Angela died unrepentant, and the world whispered her name with both horror and pity.